Wow. 31,000 in our jails here in Georgia. We have over 53,000 in our prisons here in Georgia. We have over 167,000 people that's under some form of community supervision here in our state. We have 189,000 kids that are trapped in failing schools in our state. Your theme is, do you believe in magic? I'm telling you that if we don't believe in magic, then we're going to have those numbers going to be so huge that we'll never be able to keep up with them. All across our country, we see mass incarceration. We're starting to see our veterans inside our prisons. Veterans who fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, come home, end up in our prisons. In Georgia, it's so bad we have what we call veteran dorms. Have we become a country that we allow those who fight for our freedoms that we have just to be able to stand and talk? And then when they come home, they can't find good health care. They can't find education. They get out of the military and can't find good skills. And then they end up in our prisons because they're addicted to drugs or on the streets. Failing schools throughout our state. That 189 kids that I talked about, some of those schools have been failing for 16 years in a row. Some of the schools in our rural communities have schools where the elementary has been failing for 12 years in a row, the middle school has been failing for 12 years in a row, and the high school has been failing for 12 years in a row. And we know that when a child can't read above grade level, they end up in our prisons. My question to you, students who are here at Emory University, how long do we continue this path that we allow our working class to become disposable into our prisons? Our children who are growing up watching Sesame Street ending up in our prison. There's not a person probably in this audience that has not been affected by mass incarceration in some way, that you know somebody that's inside our prisons. But let me tell you some of the great things that Georgia's doing. One of the things we've done, we've banned the box here in Georgia, which means that if you do your time and you give the government everything that you're supposed to give, then we allow you to apply for a state job. But more importantly, we are trying to train them inside our prisons. We're doing welding and heating and air inside our prisons. We've had to put charter schools inside our prisons. Imagine that. I went to a charter school graduation. We had a young lady who was the valedictorian. And in her speech, she talked about that when she came to prison, she had no credits from middle school and she had no credits from high school. And she graduated valedictorian inside the prison. We have children that are being born inside our prisons. We now, in Georgia, we have drug courts, veteran courts, mental health courts, because we were locking up those who are suffering from mental illness. We've been incarcerating those who have addiction problems to drugs and alcohol. And our prisons are being overrun. It's a sad day when the state budget ended up almost as, the prison budget ended up almost as big as the education budget in some places across the country. We have to do better. Not just for a budget crisis, but we have to do it because that's our workforce that we're developing. We cannot talk about bringing jobs home if we don't take care of those here at home and have a well-equipped workforce. One of the things that's a big issue that we have in our prisons across America is that when you get out of prison, you're on zero. We remove you from everything. And not only do we remove you from everything, but we take everything from you. And when you get out, we give you a bag with your clothes in, a debit card with $25 on, and then we send you back to the same neighborhood. After 25 years, after 30 years, after 50 years being incarcerated, you go in on a flip phone and you come out on a smartphone. We got to do better than that as a society. We have to educate in our communities. We have to be intentional with a blended education. Now we have meth and crack cocaine and heroin that is ripping through our communities, not just in inner cities, but both in rural and inner cities. Children not too far from here in Tiff, I had an opportunity to go down to Tifton, And they call it not fit. That's Tifton spelled backwards because they have no hope of making it. Have we built a society where we have generations that don't believe they can't make it? It breaks my heart. I know this is Sesame Street, but it breaks my heart going up and down the state when you ask children what they want to be and they say, I don't know. It breaks my heart where our school systems are more like our prisons now, where when a child gets in trouble in school, they get suspended and they catch a case with the district attorney. So, Damon, if I was pushing you and you pushed me in the locker room because we were liking, well, my wife, don't like my wife, but we were pushing each other in the school and we catch a case because of the district attorney instead of dealing with it on the local level. Every day on a Friday throughout our state, we have juveniles catching cases with our district attorneys, things that we used to handle at the local level. Now, I'm telling you, if you believe in magic, then we need to get back to what we used to do, the basics. That we need to get back to being able to educate our children and deal with the small disruptive behaviors in those communities. And that we need to do whatever we can to help our prisoners become what we call returning citizens. See, because that's what they are. 97% of the people that's inside our prisons will come home one day. And you have to ask yourself the question, how do you want them to come home? Do you want them to be a person that is still desperate? That we haven't changed their playground, we haven't changed their playmates, and we haven't changed their playthings. If I get taken away from society, please rehabilitate me. Give me a tool, a skill that when I get out, I can take care of my family. You know, James Oglethorpe, one of the founders of Georgia, built Georgia and protected Georgia by recruiting what we now call convicts to protect Georgia and built Georgia. Well, we flipped it. We still got a debt of prisons throughout our nation. We put fathers in prison because they can't pay for child support. You get a civil action, you may end up in prison because of contempt of court. We got to do things better. And when those that we remove from our communities, why not teach them welding? Why not teach them how to drive big rigs? Why not teach them how to do data and programming inside our prisons? One of the great things we've done here in Georgia is that we put tablets in all 53,000 returning citizens' hands inside the prisons. You know how we paid for it? Not one tax increase, through snack bars. And they listen to their music and they get emails from their loved ones. And we put education material on their tablet. And when we did this in the state of Georgia, we found out that fights went down inside the prisons. Throwovers where drugs and all other types of things thrown over the wire, that went down. Men start getting hope again. Even lifers need hope because, as I said before, 97% of them will come home one day. And as you saw here on this video where the little boy sat on the steps and complained about his father being in prison, we know the likelihood of a child who has a parent that's incarcerated, there's a likelihood of that child being incarcerated too. Look at the facts. Our educational system is broken in most cases. We have our juveniles filling up our YDCs. We have 15,000 in the state of Georgia inside our what we call youth detention centers. You add the 189 that's trapped in the failing schools. And what I mean by failing school, that means a school that can't make a 60.1 out of 100. I wouldn't eat at a restaurant that can't make 100. Either we're serious about changing how we do things, or we stop talking about it. Stop making those promises. Stop dreaming about magic. Wouldn't it be great that Emory University was packed because of the applications of people coming from all over? Ask yourself the question here. Of the 189 kids trapped in failing schools in Georgia, that's more kids that's enrolled in Georgia University, Georgia Tech, and Georgia universities and state colleges in the state of Georgia. That, my friends, is something that I truly believe has to be intentional to deal with. We have to argue for education reform in our state, and we have to argue for education reform and prison reform that's working together. And some of you may say, well, I'm not too happy about prison reform. But let me tell you this here. If you're a faith believer, this little book I read called the Bible, John wrote that from the prison of Revelations. Joseph spent some time in prison. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego spent some time in prison. Even Jesus spent some time in prison, even had a trial. And some Christians believe that since he came back from the dead, he too was a returning citizen. And that's what we call Georgia now. Our prison inmates who we put in prison, we call them now returning citizens. Because we must deal with the stigma and the shame that goes with incarceration. It's like putting a red scarlet letter on those folks that goes inside our prisons. How do we look at ways of changing the stigma that goes with mass incarceration? And believe it or not, here at Emory University, you know some of you have been late for class, and you were racing around, you passed the speed limit, and you just didn't get caught. A lot of us didn't get caught, and we should be incarcerated. But there's this thing called grace and mercy, second chances, giving people a second chance to restore their lives. I don't know about you, but growing up in North Philadelphia, one of the worst ghettos in America, there was a lot of times I didn't think I was going to make it. And even now, I have a mother who's strung out on drugs, who's 79 years of age. Do I give up on her? No. Most of the men in my family that I grew up with are either dead or in jail. My mother had a 7th grade education, and my father had a 7th grade education. But somehow I made it. I made it by having a mentor. And we too now in the state of Georgia are recruiting and building mentors for what we now call our returning citizens. Can you imagine being away from your family for 30 years and they're transient and they move? Who helps you reintegrate back into the community? And what we have normally done across America, we give them a bus pass, a bag of clothes, and go find your way. And they end up either on our streets or back in our prisons. I'm going to tell you this little story. I met an individual who he's doing 25 years inside of our federal prison here. He was telling me about his son, who's 5 years old, was expelled from school. He was a big-time drug dealer in this little town here in Georgia. And he said, PT, he called me PT for Pastor T. He said, what should I do to help my son? I said, you need to advocate from behind the walls for your son. If you don't, he's going to end up in the prison. So he called his grandmother and said, give me the teacher's name and address because I'm going to write her a letter for my son. And he sat down and he wrote that letter. He said, I know you expelled my son. He said, but my son is a collateral damage because of me. I sold drugs. His mother is hooked on crack cocaine and is selling herself on the street. He said, but the drugs that she's hooked on, I sold them all throughout the community. I did some bad things, but I need you to do whatever you can to help my son because I can't help him from behind the bars. And as this principal got this here letter, the grandmother was walking in to pick up the homework from the kid who was expelled. And immediately the principal saw the grandmother walking through the doors and she had tears running down her face as she was reading this letter. And she ran over to the grandmother and the grandmother said, you don't have to kick me out. I'm just here to pick up the paperwork for my son and the homework. She said, no, 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 no. I want you to go home and I want you to grab this boy and bring him back to school. And then she called the newspaper, and then she called the pastor and the preachers of the local community. And before you know it, everyone in this town had rallied around this little boy. But more importantly, this father went on and writing this letter, I have changed my life. I've got my associate degree in prison, I got my BA degree in prison, and I'm in a seminary class here in the federal prison. And he's changed his life. He's now preaching the gospel inside the prison He's an ordained minister. And now the whole community is helping this returning citizen by helping his son. What are we going to do? How much magic are we going to believe in across this country? What purpose do we have as a nation, as a college, as a university to change the trajectory of someone else's lives? One of the other greatest things about James Oglethorpe, he said, non sibili si alis, which in short means, and my Italian may be a little bit butchered, he simply means not for self, but for others. What do you do for others? That same book I read says, to whom much is given, much is required. We always say yes to the giving when people give us things or bless us with things, and we end up having things given to us and we succeed. But we never say yes to the requirement. We have a requirement to make this nation better by making sure that no one is disposable and no more victims. I believe in magic. Thank you. Thank you.